Thank you all. It's good to see familiar and new faces out there this afternoon. We're on the home stretch. I'm going to change gears a little bit here for the research roundup. I hesitate to use roundup, but I think we are going to reclaim roundup right now. But actually, I would like to start today's research roundup considering the word intensification. In agriculture, intensification generally refers to the discovery and implementation of farming practices that coax more food from the same area of land or with the same amount of labor. Large yield increases experienced in the Green Revolution of the 20th century were achieved in part because of input intensification, fertilizers, pesticides, irrigation. There has emerged over the last years something of a consensus amongst a group of recognized leaders in the effort to meet human food needs or desires in the 21st century. Let's see, Jane, where is that National Geographic? That was oh, it's right. Oh, yeah. So how many of you saw this issue of National Geographic just a short while ago? Okay, fair number. The New Food Revolution. Okay, this is within the last 6 months, I think, May 2014. John Foley was responsible for the opening article of this series and is maybe in front of the global pack of food strategists. Foley and others have suggested that 5 things need to happen to meet the global food challenge of the 21st century while preserving the greatest possible biodiversity. Do not convert any new lands from native ecosystems into agriculture. Increase productivity on the ag lands that already exist. Achieve this increase in productivity with fewer inputs. Eat less meat and animal products. Waste less food. I think we can appreciate not wanting to convert more wildlands into agriculture and can understand how eating less animal protein and not wasting food could contribute to global food security. But what about increasing productivity with fewer inputs? What's up with that? I think what John and others suggest is that we can no longer maintain or increase yields using the old approach of input intensification. It's too expensive in environmental and economic costs. They contend that agriculture must shift towards ecological or sustainable intensification as opposed to input intensification. Ecological intensification involves substituting purchased inputs with ecological processes. Goals of ecological intensification include increasing soil organic matter, increasing nutrient and water uptake efficiency by crops, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture, reduced reliance on pesticides. While there's a wide agreement that these goals are hugely desirable, if not necessary, and certainly the concept of ecological intensification sounds good, when it really comes down to it, there's a limited amount of ecological intensification that can take place in monocrop fields of annual grains. The reason is that it's difficult to capture many ecological functions in a one-species ecosystem that is dramatically knocked back to a simplified, highly disturbed state with the plow or herbicide every year. How do you get a soil to stop leaking nutrients when there are no roots to take the nutrients up? How do you stop a disease from sweeping through a crop population when every individual plant is genetically uniform? This framework of ecological or sustainable intensification has been a useful one for our work at the Land Institute to step into. The food-producing ecosystem we propose, that is, a perennial polyculture, which means more than one crop species growing together over numerous years, represents a later successional stage of ecosystem development. A stage at which most of the goals of ecological intensification happen as derivatives of the ecosystem itself. That's the key sentence. I'll say it again. A stage in which most of the goals of ecological intensification happen as derivatives of the ecosystem itself. And so in relation to Bill's talk this morning, when you're as ignorant as we are, it's better to rely on the agroecosystem to manage itself. Like the prairie, we expect a more prairie-like agriculture to build soil organic matter, leak fewer nutrients, suppress major pest outbreaks, shrink the welcome mat for weeds, all resulting in reduced labor or energy required to maintain the food ecosystem itself. So what follows right now will be brief progress reports on breeding the perennial crop species and investigating how to grow polycultures of these species that will help make up the food-producing ecosystems of the future, Armageddon or not. And after this session, we will lead many of you on tours of some of our research plots across the street. But before we get to these reports, I want to let you know about a couple of exciting developments that have taken place over the last year. And I will start within the last 24 hours. As some of you might know, the Kansas City Royals did clinch a playoff berth. First time in 29 years, last night. So anyone who questions whether high-yielding perennial polycultures are possible should recalibrate. Anything's possible. Since last Prairie Festival, we have continued to get the word out about our research. We've had some articles published from Wired magazine to the Progressive Farmer. That's quite a range. We were recently featured in a report from the field by Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. We also were invited to give research seminars at a number of universities, including 2 at Cornell, Kansas State, University of Kansas, Fort Hays State, Iowa State, and Stanford. Something that's on the front burner of this group is an international meeting of plant breeders, ecologists, geneticists, modelers, and other disciplines that will convene in Estes Park, Colorado at the end of October. The meeting is called New Routes for Ecological Intensification. It will be co-hosted by the Land Institute and the Estes Institute and include researchers from institutions in Canada, Ethiopia, Italy, Argentina, Australia, Sweden, South Africa, China, Mali, and within the US, we have people coming from the University of Minnesota, University of Georgia, University of Kansas, Kansas State, Ohio State, Colorado State, Texas A&M, Cornell, University of Michigan, Michigan State, and Oklahoma State. Let's give it up. We're excited about this. The meeting's designed to focus on the most pressing research challenges in perennial grain breeding and agroecology. And we expect for this meeting to help inform a research agenda not only for our group here, but for many in attendance. And a note of interest about this meeting, it will take place at the Stanley Hotel that inspired Stephen King to write The Shining, and we will be there on Halloween. Okay, so. All right, so I'm gonna get off the stage here in a minute, but I'm going to start, we're going to go around the circle here with a little bit of a recap of ecology research this last year. In ecology, we've continued to focus on intercropping of legumes with grain crops to understand which species can get along over time, how much nitrogen is fixed by the legume, and how much nitrogen is transferred from the legume to the associated grain. We have focused more efforts on understanding how perennial cropping systems might differ from annual cropping systems with respect to carbon sequestration and nitrous oxide emissions, nitrous oxide being a potent greenhouse gas. We're fortunate to have Brian Rumsey, a PhD student from University of Kansas, intern with us during spring semester. I saw Brian. Are you out there? Oh, there's Brian. Well, stand up, Brian. All right. There's an article in a recent land report with some of his findings, and I highly recommend it. We have initiated an experiment at our Niles Prairie Meadow site to understand the nature of nutrient limitation in a continuously harvested native prairie ecosystem. We are in our second year of examining the hydration status, how thirsty or how satisfied our different perennial crops are throughout the growing season. We do this to inform whether it makes sense to grow particular species of crops next to each other in a polyculture. And most of the species behave as one might predict. They're happy when hydrated after a rain and stressed when it's 105 in the afternoon after weeks of no rain. But there's one plant that has stood out as a remarkable anomaly. The Silphium oilseed crop that David will talk about stays in that happy hydrated zone pretty much all of the time. This plant has a well-developed deep root system and I think could be a model plant for new domesticates that are well adapted to a warmer, drier climate. Finally, we hosted a project of a science teacher from Salina who's getting her master's at Colorado State. Sharon Ekstrom looked at the abundance and diversity of beetles, especially carnivorous carabid beetles, across annual crop, kernza, and native restored prairie, as well as intact prairie ecosystems. And one of the most noteworthy findings was that the most sensitive carabid beetle, the sort of canary in the mine beetle that is only known to be found in intact prairie, was found only in intact prairie. And that's interesting. So it's not in our perennial grain yet, and it's not in the restored 12-year-old perennial re-veg plots. And so these are the kind of mysteries in terms of a biocontrol agent like a carabid beetle that we want to go after. So before I turn the podium over to Magid here, a graduate student from University of Kansas, he's going to say a few things about what he did this summer. I want to acknowledge and cheer on the research interns and technicians who get the work done. And I think I see a few of them over here. If you could stand up, interns and technicians. There's more than 3 of them. There's a cadre. They're probably working out there right now, but thank you very much. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Magid Nossi, who is a